Donald Trump bought his half of this building, I don't know, 10 years ago. The building is still assessed at the price that was paid for it about 30 years ago. So how does this work? Well, if Donald Trump decides to sell his shares in the building, by the way, it is not listed in the assessor's office as Donald Trump. It's listed as 555 California LLC, right? It's a limited liability company that owns that property. So all Donald Trump needs to do is sell his share of 555 California LLC, cash out, and then sell someone else that share of 555 California LLC, and then they will own half the Bank of America building, but it'll never be reassessed. Their property taxes are still 30 years ago. So because of this, commercial property owners, particularly the big commercial property owners, have been getting away with tremendous amounts of underpaying taxes. We're going to release a story on this week. I had 2 summer interns, thanks to a generous grant from the San Francisco Foundation. If anybody out there works there, thank you. I got a modest grant. We had 2 summer interns look at the biggest 50 properties in San Francisco, what they're assessed at and what they ought to be assessed at. And we found, for example, Donald Trump is taking about $18 million a year away from the schools and the government of California, of San Francisco, away from the San Francisco public schools, essentially. $18 million a year. Donald Trump. That money's going to Donald Trump instead of to the public schools because of the way Prop 13 works. Prop 15 would change that. The total of the biggest 50 buildings is about $380 million a year that the city is losing to big real estate developers. Prop 15 would allow us to assess the Bank of America building at what it's really worth and make Donald Trump pay his taxes. Right. So that's Prop 15. There are several tax measures on the local ballot. Right. And I talked about a wealth tax. On the pantheon of taxes, wealth taxes and income taxes are the best. Next is property taxes. Property taxes are better than sales taxes because overall, people who own property are wealthier than people who don't. Not everyone. There are rich tenants and there are moderately well-off homeowners and landlords. But generally speaking, particularly when you get to commercial taxes, those people have more money than, the owners of the big commercial buildings have more money than the rest of us. So property taxes, raising their property taxes is the next best way to get money. The worst way to get money is a sales tax because it's the most regressive. Right? So let me talk about a couple of the creative things that we're doing in San Francisco. Proposition I is a real estate transfer tax. This goes into that second level of taxes. It's not as good as an income tax or a wealth tax, but it's pretty darn good. Prop I would increase the transfer tax on real estate that sells for more than $10 million. This is paid, by the way, by the seller. So if Donald Trump sells 555 California Street to the Shorenstein Company, actually, I think they sold it to him. The other way, he sells that. He has to pay a transfer tax. The same way, if I were to sell my house, I'd have to pay a transfer tax, which would probably be about, a couple $1,000s. Anybody who's sold property recently, it's not that big. It's usually about 0.01. It's a relatively small amount. It basically pays for all of the ministerial stuff of recording those deeds and that sort of thing. Standard in California, you pay a transfer tax. It's a tax we're allowed to raise. And this measure would raise the transfer tax on properties that sell for more than $10 million. That is all high-end commercial property and very, very high-end real estate. Right? This is rich people paying taxes. People who have, and by the way, if you own commercial or residential property in San Francisco that's worth more than $10 million and you've owned it for more than a year, you've already made vastly more in appreciation, even during the pandemic, than you would pay in real estate transfer taxes. So that's Prop I. Right? This is one of the things that at the Business Times, the mayor said she doesn't support because she said we're taxing businesses too much. This is not taxing business. This is taxing high-end. This is not taxing small business. It's taxing high-end real estate. Okay. Proposition L is a really interesting one. Proposition L raises the city's business tax, the gross receipts tax on business, for any company that pays its CEO more than 100 times what it pays its lowest paid employee. So if you are Twitter, for example, and you pay your CEO 100 times more than you pay your lowest level entry employee, your business tax goes up. Well, this does two things. One, it brings in a lot of money for the city. Number two, perhaps it encourages people to either pay their CEO a little less or better, pay their workers a little more. Right? This will apply, for example, this will hit the big hotels when they come back. Right? It will hit the big corporations who way excessively pay their CEO. There's also, so those business taxes, as I say, that's tier two. It's not as good as an income tax. We can't do an income tax on businesses. Only the state can do that, so we can't locally do that. Right? Then we have Prop J. Prop J is a partial tax for the schools. The schools are taking a huge hit. I don't love partial taxes. You know why? Because a partial tax is based on the square foot frontage of your property. And that means that I pay the same tax, which I'm happy to pay, as someone who owns a property that's worth 10 times as much as mine downtown. Right? It's charged by the parcel, not by the value of the property. I don't love it, but it's something that cities can do. The state limits our ability to raise taxes. Prop 13 limits our ability to raise taxes. This is a small step. It's not as bad as a sales tax. Right? And that would go directly to the public schools. So those are 4 different things that are on the ballot that would in some way, in a small way, in some cases I think with Prop 15 in a big way, address a little bit of that graph that I showed you when we started this talk. Okay? And that is a really important thing. At every step, every level, we have to think about our politics from my perspective in that context. Okay, I want to talk quickly about a couple of other things that are on the ballot that are really important. Right? One of them is Prop 16. Prop 16 would restore affirmative action in California. Prop 16 would say that we should be able to use race as a factor in, for example, college admissions, which we are not now allowed to do since Prop 208 passed like 20 years ago. This is really important on a lot of levels, and it's important because it says, if we pass it, it says that California believes in equity, not equality. And there's a big difference. Equality says we're going to give everyone a level playing field. Everyone gets to take the same SAT test. Everyone gets the same grade, take the same opportunity to pass chemistry, and the ones who do the best get admitted to Berkeley. Equity says not everybody starts in the same place. It's not a level playing field, and it's not a fair race. And that some people need a boost, particularly African Americans and Latinos, because they started off lower on the scale. Because this country has systematically, for 400 years, either enslaved or made it impossible for Black families to gain wealth through a wide range of laws that is a topic for another lecture. Right? But Prop 16 says that matters. Equity matters. And the expert on equity is a woman named Susan Feinstein, who wrote a book called The Just City. I just happen to have a copy of it here. It's really brilliant and very hard to read because she's an academic. But she says equity is by definition redistributive. Equity means that the people on the top have to come down a notch so that the people on the bottom have a chance up. I consider that part of this entire context that we're talking about. Right? Prop 16 allows affirmative action again. Right? Prop 17 restores the right to vote for people who've been released from prison, but may still be on parole or probation. This is a huge deal nationwide. There are a huge number of people, and of course, we know from statistics they are predominantly people of color, who have lost the right to vote because they've been convicted of a felony. They've served their time, they're out of prison, but they're still not allowed to vote. In California, this would allow people to vote even if they're still on probation or parole. Prop 21 is also in this context that we talked about, transfer of wealth. Prop 21 would allow cities to extend rent control to vacant apartments and allow cities to have real eviction protections. This is really important because it doesn't mandate anything, but it says if the city and county of San Francisco wants to, we could pass rent control on vacant apartments. We can basically say the rent on the apartment is $2,000 a month. The tenant moves out, it's still $2,000 a month. And you can't raise it to whatever rate the market will bear when a tenant moves out. Why is that important? Because right now, and over the past couple of years, we've seen as rents go up, landlords try to evict tenants. Because if you've got a rent-controlled tenant who's been in place for 25 years, their rent is way below market, if you can just get that person out through whatever fraudulent eviction you can think of. There's a tenant in Chinatown they tried to evict for hanging wash out on the line outside her house because it was unsightly. There was a person who they tried to evict for having his bicycle in the hall. He brought his bicycle inside and he brought it through the hall to go to his apartment. That's a nuisance. That's an eviction. Right? This is because landlords want to be able to raise the rent because of the way our rent control system works. Prop 21 would allow us to have real rent control if we want to as a city. Berkeley, Santa Monica, West Hollywood used to have this before the state outlawed it. Right. So very quickly, I don't think I need to tell you too much. Prop 22, you know what Prop 22 is? Prop 22 is Uber and Lyft attempting to avoid having to pay their drivers as employees. The state legislature passed a law saying you have to treat people as employees, give them health insurance, give them time off, pay them minimum wage. Uber and Lyft have gone to the ballot and together have put up about $138 million, I believe, making this the most expensive measure in the history of California to overturn that decision. Right? And at the same time, Prop 25 is the bail bonds industry trying to overturn state law and court decisions that say that people should not be held in jail because they can't afford to pay bail. The bail bonds industry makes a lot of money off of, frankly, misery. The bail bonds industry makes a lot of money because I get arrested, they put me in jail, I've got to get out or I'm going to lose my job, but I can't afford the $50,000 bail, so I have to go to a bail bonds person and I have to pay them $5,000 to put up the $50,000 bond for me so that I can get out of jail and go back to work. Okay. The state is changing this. The state is now saying release should be based on whether you're a flight threat, whether you're a danger to the community, not whether you can afford bail. Rich people and poor people should be treated the same way. Prop 25 seeks to overturn that. Just mention a couple other things really quickly. Some of you may be interested in. Let's see. Proposition C in San Francisco would allow non-citizens to serve on commissions. Would basically say if you are not a U.S. citizen, you can still be on the planning commission, on the police commission. That's a charter change. We would, I believe, be the first city in the country to allow non-citizens to serve on commissions. Proposition E is really important. Proposition E is the heart of the defund the police movement, in a sense, because right now it is in the city charter, our Constitution, since 1994, it is in the city charter that we must have at least 1,971 police officers in San Francisco. Why is that in the charter? I have no idea. I was against it. I didn't vote for it. My grandfather always used to say, when he was talking about people in Congress and the White House, it's like, how did that guy get elected? I didn't vote for him. We didn't vote for that guy. How did he get elected? I didn't vote for this. I don't know. It did pass. It passed in 1994 in a very different era. But right now, if we want to defund the police and we want to reduce the size of the police force, which I think many people want to do, I think we have recognized as a city that we no longer need to solve a lot of problems with police. That, for example, there's 20,000 calls a year that the SFPD gets that are purely related to homelessness. Either it's a homeless person who is having a mental health crisis or a homeless person who is somehow walking in the middle of a street, right? 20,000 calls to 911 that you do not need. In fact, you should not have an armed officer who is not trained in mental health responding to that call. That call should be responded to by an EMT, a mental health worker, and a social worker. They're trained to deal with that situation. And only very, very rarely does it involve violent crime. So you don't need the police to respond to that one. But right now, and we could, if we just moved, as we're trying to in the city, to replace those 20,000 calls. Instead of having police officers, we would have unarmed civilians who are trained to do it. We could reduce the number of cops in the force by probably 200 just by doing that. And this is what we heard at the police commission and the board of supervisors. We can't do that legally unless we get rid of that ridiculous 1971 number, which means passing Proposition E, which then gives the police commission, the board of supervisors, the mayor, the authority to say, this is how many cops we really need. And that number may be, over the years, may continue to decrease. I heard the person who runs the civilian homeless outreach team talk about how with just 1 or 2 more cars, they could handle all of those calls, and they wouldn't need any cops involved at all. And that costs way less. I mean, for better or for worse, cops are really expensive. Cops get paid a lot of money, and it costs an awful lot to train them, and they have very expensive pensions. And I'm not here to say we shouldn't pay cops well. We should pay all public employees well. And police have a difficult and dangerous job. I'm not saying, but it is way less expensive to have trained mental health and social workers handle these calls than to have police do it. Plus, it's more appropriate. Okay, I've been going on longer than I promised. I'm going to stop now and take some questions. I will look at what is in the chat.
And I'm going to stop recording now, just so everyone knows.
Okay, yes.